Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dahir Muhammad, and today I'll be presenting how can you stop the growth of mold in bread. Introduction. In this science experiment, I will attempt to find 1. How can you stop the growth of mold in bread? 2. Which environment mold grows in? And 3. Which types of bread have the most mold growth? How will I conduct my experiment? In this experiment, I'll be testing 2 types of bread, rye and white bread, in 3 different environments. The first environment will be in a closed-off plastic container with no outside air. The second environment will be in a moist Ziploc that is closed off. The last environment will be in a Ziploc in a freezer. Also, for the first 2 environments, I'll conduct them both in a room temperature cabinet in order to make it a fair test. My hypothesis. In this science experiment, I predict that the bread in the moist environment will have the most mold growth. The reason why I think that is because mold is made when water reacts with the mold spores in the air. I also predict that the breads in a closed-off plastic container will not have any mold growth because there is no water in the bread, so it should be impossible for mold to grow. For the breads in the freezer, I think there should be 0 mold growth. The reason why is because if there's any water in the bread or mold spores, they would instantly freeze. Materials needed. The first material you need is very obvious. You need rye and white bread or any other types of bread. The second material you need is a measuring spoon in order to make it a fair test. The third material you need is a thermometer in order to record their temperature. The fourth material you need is a plastic container and or a Ziploc. Procedure. Number 1. Place the breads in their respective environments. Number 2. Add exactly 1 tablespoon of water to each bread in the moist Ziploc in order to make it a fair test. Number 3. Measure their temperature. Number 4. Wait 7 days. Number 5. Collect your results. Here are my results. I made them in a table to make it easy to see. For the white bread in a freezer, I ticked the 0 mold section because there was 0 mold in it. For the white bread in a wet Ziploc, it was slightly moldy, so I ticked the slightly moldy section. For the white bread in a plastic container, I ticked the very moldy section because it was very moldy. For the rye bread in a freezer, it had 0 mold in it, so I ticked the 0 mold section. For the rye bread in a wet Ziploc, it was very moldy, so I ticked the very moldy section. For the rye bread in a plastic container, it was slightly moldy, so I ticked the slightly moldy section. Here are the pictures of my breads. For the top breads, these are my breads in the dry and plastic containers. For the bottom ones, they're the breads in a moist environment in the Ziploc. On the bread in the top left, you can see there is black mold there because the bacteria reacted to the mold, creating the black color. For the rye bread on the right, there's a slight mold over there. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's there. For the mold in a Ziploc on the left, the one with all these colors, white, green, yellow, and pink, this one had a lot of mold growth. For the bread on the right, the white bread, there is a slight mold growth. I'm not sure if you can see it. There's little white dots over there. For the bread in the freezer, there was 0 to no mold in their results. After 7 days, I measured the temperature of all the breads. The white bread in the container measured 27 degrees Celsius. The white bread in the freezer measured -10 degrees Celsius. The white bread in the moist Ziploc surprisingly measured 30 degrees Celsius. The reason why I said surprisingly is because my house's room temperature is about 26 to 27 degrees Celsius. The white bread in the dry plastic container measured 29 degrees Celsius. For the rye bread, the ones in the Ziploc and the plastic container were both 27 degrees Celsius. For the rye bread in the freezer, it measured negative 12 degrees Celsius. My analyzation. The results were way different than what I expected it to be. The mold grew in all places except the fridge. The reason why that happened is because mold grows in humid and warm places. That's also the reason why the mold did not grow in the freezer. The freezer's temperature was so low that if any mold spores or water droplets made it in there, they would instantly freeze. Conclusion. To conclude this experiment, I will answer the questions in the introductions. Number 1. How can you stop the growth of mold in bread? The way you can stop the growth of mold in bread is by putting the bread in a cool to cold environment, and you must ensure that there is no water in the bread. If you can do that, then your bread will preserve for a very long time. Number 2. Which environment does mold grow in? Mold grows in humid to warm temperatures because it is easier to spread and reproduce their mold cells. Number 3. Which types of bread have the most mold growth? Based on my experiment, rye bread has the most mold growth because of the preservatives that were added to non-organic rye bread. In my case, my rye bread was not organic, so it decomposed faster than normal rye bread. The end. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to my presentation about my science project. I hope you had a great time. This took me a very long time, so thank you for listening. Bye.